This video deals with topics such as racism, rape, and abuse, though it does not go into explicit detail. Viewer discretion is advised. In 2005, white Mormon author Stephenie Meyer released Twilight, a romantic novel marketed towards teenagers about a teenage girl falling in love with a teenage-appearing vampire. The final book in this series and the first film adaptation, both released in 2008, making 2018 sort of the neat 10th anniversary for the whole franchise. Twilight was both loved and hated upon its release. The first book was the best-selling novel in the year of its release, and millions of fans adored the series, but there was also plenty of disdain. Major points of dissent included romantification of abusive behaviors, racist portrayal of Native Americans, and distaste for the writing style. In January 2018, YouTuber Lindsay Ellis uploaded a video entitled Dear Stephenie Meyer, in which she apologizes for buying into Twilight hate and examines why she and the screenwriter for the first Twilight movie believe people hated Twilight. Like most things Ellis does, the editing is great and the essay is technically well written, but as she describes why she thinks Twilight isn't as bad as its critics say, she never once mentions how the Quileute people are portrayed. Never once. All of the hate is laid upon the shoulders of either misogynists that hate teenage girls or well-intentioned fools calling for abusive elements in this to be condemned, despite these elements existing in other media. This video seems to have been the first major step in what has been dubbed the Twilight Renaissance, a recent trend of Twilight appreciation. Throughout 2018, former fans and haters alike took to reinvigorating the Twilight fanbase, be it through memes, fan art, or metas written about how these racist characters are all secretly gay, like that makes it okay. These Twilight is now gay pieces popped up primarily on Tumblr and Twitter. Feminist and feminist-leaning websites all began to post their own takes on the Neo-Meyer movement. BuzzFeed admits, with a few paragraphs stolen from social media, of course, that Twilight had racism, but still concludes their article saying women just deserve to love the story. The Daily Dot likewise musters only half a sentence to decry any racism, which is just a link to an actual criticism. Polygon's article mentions that there are individuals still disgusted by the anti-native themes, but argues you can like fiction despite its problematic elements. Heard that one before. So, this is a perfect microcosm of white feminism, and before I get into why there is a problem, I want to establish a few things. First of all, yes, there was undeniable misogyny leveled against fans of Twilight and Stephenie Meyer herself, and no amount of their racism makes sexism okay, just like no amount of sexism from a man of color makes racism against him okay. Also, bullying shouldn't be done. But criticizing art isn't bullying, it's art criticism. Okay, now, the general lack of care given to the racism present in these books is only compounded by the defenses suggesting fans deserve to love them. Enjoying racist art free from criticism is not a fundamental human right. This framing of discouragement of consumption of racist materials as misogyny places the hobby of white women above the dignity of people of color, both men and women. White feminism is not just when a feminist is white. There have been plenty of decent white feminists, and there are plenty alive today. But white feminism is a concept that refers to the prioritization of white women above all. Not all proponents of white feminism are necessarily white, but they still contribute to white supremacy. Some examples of this phenomenon include Susan B. Anthony advocating for white women to get the right to vote on the basis of believing black men deserved it less, John Lennon and Yoko Ono equating woman with the N-word, as if there aren't any black women, and the portrayal of female European monarchs as heroic figures while ignoring their complacency and role in imperialism. While I'm not saying that Meyer or any individual that indulges in uncritical Twilight apologist tactics is a white feminist in every regard, the move itself is very white feminist. If the Twilight likers mention the racism in the books, it's just in passing. But I want to demonstrate that it's not just the passing kind of racism. This isn't like the racism on the side that you'll find in a lot of works written by white people. This is racism in the foreground. Of course, I want to establish that there have been differing opinions within the Quileute community. There is no consensus because no group of people thinks as a hive mind. And there are good elements of exposure in a vacuum. Quileute tribal member Anne Penn Charles tributes the regaining of northern tribal land in part due to the national attention gained from the series, but she also notes that people came to La Push with misconceptions about who the Quileute are. And, as I'm not Quileute myself, or even from that section of the country, I will be mainly representing arguments that can be found at Truth vs. Twilight, a website linked below, that was a feminist analytical collaboration between the Quileute tribe and the Burke Museum, specifically created by Dr. Deanna Dart Newton and Tasia Endo. Now, there are some things I've noticed that are Native American stereotypes unspecific to the Quileute, and I will comment on that by myself later. First point, real quick, is that the Quileute did not receive financial compensation from Meyer's use of their culture. Yes, tourists visited La Push and presumably spent money on local businesses, but the book sales, movie tickets, and Hot Topic appropriation souvenirs yielded no direct benefit to the Quileute. Speaking of culture, obviously the Quileute are not werewolves. Yeah, no surprise there. But I mean, they never even thought that they were werewolves. Yes, traditionally it is believed that Quati the Transformer transformed two wolves into the Quileute ancestors, but there has never been a back-and-forth wolf-man class of Quileute. Should Meyer have just had made some Quileute werewolves and not attempted to connect a superpower to the culture, that would be one questionable thing. But she didn't do that. She rewrote the origin myth of the Quileute to suit her own needs. A white woman seeing a culture that she likes elements of, claiming it as her own, warping it beyond recognition, and selling it for a profit is peak white feminism. Of course, there is also the equation of Quileute with animals. Again, if these were actual people that could become wolves, that would be one thing, but the characters all act like rabid dogs, and they are in stark contrast to the white vampires. The werewolves, save a few, are violent and dangerous. The dehumanization of native people, portraying them as savage and more animalistic by nature, is hopefully an obvious example of racism. Like wolves, the werewolves are beautiful, but the language is reminiscent of fetishization of native features when describing the human aspects of the shapeshifter. Skin tones are described as russet and copper, just a synonym away from red. They are often shirtless and virile, like in a pulp novel meant to tantalize white women. And they are, again, violent. Look, obviously the actors that portray the werewolves are handsome people, but beauty can be appreciated without deeming people of color as less civilized than the white, classy heartthrobs. Like I said, Truth vs. Twilight is a feminist website. There's criticism of the portrayal of the white women as well as the native women in the series. Good female characters are subservient and defined by their male relatives and love interests, while evil female characters are sexualized and sadistic. So, even without racism, this isn't good feminism. That's white feminism for you. As long as a white woman did it, it's empowering, even when it isn't. Of course, I'm here to talk about the racism today. Native women in Twilight are submissive and matronly, just like the stereotypes say they should be. When they are not justifying or excusing abuse, they are serving meals and comforting men. There is also an incorrect implication that women become council members when their council member husbands die, when in reality, both men and women need to be voted onto the council. Another big problem with the portrayal of the Quileute women is the subject of imprinting, a magical misogynist force spread onto the werewolf's mate that can't be controlled or undone. The women are trapped in a relationship until they die. In reality, Quileute divorce has been a concept for a long time. And here's where I'll editorialize. Portraying the sexuality of native men as uncontrollable is, again, racist. The white vampires get to choose who they are attracted to, but the native men, just like the old stereotype says, are unable to tame their primal urges to reproduce. Worst of all is when the character Jacob Black imprints upon a white child. This parallel to child marriage is abhorrent. Now let me make one thing clear. Yes, there are Native American men that are rapists, and yes, there have been Native American men that have raped white women. But white women are unbelievably more likely to be assaulted by white men before anyone else. That's how it is for every racial group, except for Native women, the only group more likely to be sexually abused by men outside of their race. The image of Native men taking white women and girls by force is a long-standing one, when the opposite of this is true. Usually parroted by white men seeking to demonize interracial relationships, this storyline is also used by white women, either in the traditional straightforward fear-mongering way, or as a fantasy about the insatiable savage. I'm not saying Meyer definitely fetishized native men, but it fits the image race fetishists like to produce. This is why it's important to critique Twilight. It perpetuates racism. Focusing on the sexism Meyer faced, while ignoring the xenophobia that she produced, is, at best, unintentionally irresponsible, and at worst, supporting whiteness above decency. You don't have to hate yourself if you like Twilight. I'm not saying that, and the Quileute people aren't saying that. But just because you liked it doesn't mean it's worth reviving. As far as teenage girls enjoying it goes, are the feelings of non-white teenage girls not valid? Another tactic employed by Ellis is to point out that media written primarily for men is often as offensive, if not more so, than Twilight, and those works are heralded as great art, or at least permissible fun. And while this is true, the instinct to then abstain from criticizing a white woman is the incorrect one. Rather, if a man or a woman is racist in the art that they produce, they should be denounced similarly and emphatically.